Hey guys, it's Alex. Why is Alex here? It's Alex O'Neill, host of Irrational Passions Podcast at AlFighter27 on Twitter. Plug. This is not my normal day. It's not a Tuesday or Friday. I don't know what day it is because that's how post works. But since I missed one last week because I was busy getting ready on Friday for Greg to come on the show, I figured I'd record an extra one. And after my last video went up yesterday, this is recording on Saturday for reference. One of the co-hosts gave me some sass. So I figured I'd do a follow-up video to Alex Talks About the History of Irrational Passions. And I will do Alex Talks About the History of Irrational Passions Podcast. I've got a note card, the History of Irrational Passions Podcast on it. For reference, the thing that started this, Tony, I'll have it like swipe in over here. Tony Horvath, co-host of Irrational Passions Podcast, gave me the sass on Facebook. As soon as the video goes up, he just posts, Alex records video about Irrational Passions, doesn't mention Tony or Nabishin at all. I see how it is. Oh, do you, Tony? Well, here I am recording an entire video about you guys, kind of. I didn't really talk about the podcast itself or the guests and hosts we've had on the show in my history of Irrational Passions. So I figured I'd dedicate a whole thing to that because the podcast and the website are so different. You know, they've evolved in so many different ways. So I talked about how the website went WordPress and all that stuff. So let's start. So episode 1 recorded July 6th, 2010, which seems like so long ago. And that was me, Evan, and Scott. That was back in the good old days when this was pure. When it wasn't about Tony Horvath and Nabishin, Brian Jackson looking motherfucker. But that was so long ago. And then episode 3, I'll give you guys some behind the scenes stories while I go through this because there are some good ones. Episode 3 I wasn't on because I had my tonsils removed. I told Scott and Evan literally the only thing that will hold me back from staying on the show is having part of my throat cut out. So it was just Scott and Evan on that show. It was episode 3, so they didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing back then. Oh my god. Plus the format was just bad and just don't listen to episode 3. And by that, I mean you should, and see how much we've grown up. So that was fun. So I'd gotten advice from another podcast about how to start a podcast. I got the tips on Libsyn and all that, and then starting a website with it and all that jazz. And they recommended that before you have any guests on, you should find your own groove. You should give it a couple months. They recommended about 10 shows before you started letting guests in. So I did that. On episode 10 was the first time we ever had guests. This note card has the history of Irrational Passions on it. I don't know if I mentioned that yet, but this is what I'm working with. Episode 10 of the podcast, we had Joe on for the first time. A lot of people think Joe was there from the beginning. A lot of people think Tony was there from the beginning. He was not. I'll tell you when Tony was on the first time. He was not there at the beginning. He did not put in the blood, sweat, and tears that we did. Nabishin thought up until about a month ago that Tony had been there from the beginning, so goes to show how great of a host he is. Joe was on episode 10 for the first time. And that was tons of fun. We also had a friend, we refer to him only as Rebel. They had both been on, and it was tons of fun, and we just laughed and giggled and had a good time. That was the first time we ever had guests on. And after the fact, because Joe, leading up to episode 10, had been like, "Hey man, when am I going to be on your podcast?" After the fact, Scott, Evan, and I immediately started talking like Joe was tons of fun. Because fuck Rebel, right? No, Rebel was fun. But he had his own show at the time. Joe didn't, and we were like, "Hey, Joe, it's a lot of fun to have on. If we needed a fourth host, I think he would be our man." And then Joe joined on episode 13. So there you go. There's a little history snippet for you. Joe did not start the podcast. I'm looking at you, Joe. That's at Aces High on Twitter. So follow him. Give him some love. Even though he consistently has had 80 more followers than me for the past year. He's a bastard. PlayStation lifestyles. Get out of here. This kid. So the next guest we had on was on episode 14, which was right after Joe joined. So goes to show how rambunctious and ambitious we were. I almost said rambitious. We had David Gallant on episode 14, but something happened with his audio file and it was completely fucked. And that show never came out. That is the first lost episode of Irrational Passions. I believe there's only one more, but I could be wrong about that. So we had David on episode 14 and you guys never heard that show. It was awesome. Let me tell you. Woo! You guys missed out. The next guest we had on was Mr. Prime Buster from Down to Fort X on episode 16, which was just crazy. It's our first, unless you count Canadians, it was our first international guest. But, I mean, who really counts Canadians? He's actually in Scotland. He actually had to go to a different time zone. I'm just kidding, David, please. So that was kind of that. And then we started developing, that was when we started doing more reviews. On the site. Back in the day, we used to do reviews on the podcast, so you should go listen to how bad they are. And then the first big guest we had, like the first big name that we dropped, if I may, was Dan Amrick on episode 27. Dan Amrick was awesome. Seriously, that's one of my favorite episodes we've done. The way it was recorded was a lot like the Greg Miller episode, where we recorded the middle segment with Dan first. We talked about news. And then we had a discussion segment about franchises that we're fatiguing on. And it was really funny because Dan was, he still is the community manager at Activision Blizzard, and he was really good about everything, I'll say. He like emailed us back afterwards because Joe had set this one up. And he had emailed us back afterwards, like, you guys had like a really organized show. I was really surprised. And, sometimes I come on a podcast and they're not as organized, but you guys had a strict schedule. You stuck to it and it went really well. I'm really impressed with you guys, especially when you're like in your late 20s in the episodes. I'm like, that's awesome. Dan Amrick just gave us a huge compliment. And like, we're going to get into this a little later, but Irrational Podtacular is going to be this big charity live podcast that we did for 12 hours, which never happened. Still kills me. I know if Nobshin's watching this, he's just laughing his ass off. And I contacted Dan, who's going to be on that. And when I said like we had to cancel because a ton of personal things came up, he's like, just call me when you need me. That was the quote from him. So Dan will definitely be back on the show again. He was awesome. The next guest we had on, I'm doing this hopefully in chronological order. We may have had like repeat guests on. I know David Gallant was on again after the Lost episode because we had to actually put out a show with him on it. Next guest we had on was Jeff Chorney from Interactive Distragons. He was on episode 39, which was the first time we had Jeff on. I don't know if we had Glenn on that episode as well. I'm not sure. There's an episode I should have written down the number. Episode we had Glenn Burgess and Jeff Chorney from Indus on at the same time, and it was crazy. I wouldn't say it was a train wreck because it was really, really funny and it was a lot of fun to record, but there was a lot of people on that podcast, and Jeff and Glenn would just make fun of us for being like fetuses and whatnot. So, fun fact about episode 39. In the background at some point you can hear Tony talking. Tony brought me food for that episode because I was like, Tony, you want to hang out? And like, oh fuck, I have to record a podcast. We have a guest on tonight. So Tony's like, I'll just hang out and listen. Because he had already started listening to the show because Scott had turned him on to it because they were friends. And Tony and I were hanging out, and Tony listened into the show. And then after that, Tony said, like, hey, I'd come on the show. So you guys know. And Scott was all for adding him to the crew. I'm like, all right, let's wait. I don't know about this Tony Horvath kid. I don't know about him. So we had Tony on episode 41. And that was the first time Tony was on. We had tons of fun. Him and Scott have this magical chemistry that no one else can really recreate. So he was then added on episode 43. So there you go, Nabashin. 43 episodes. There you go. Tony's been on Tony will be celebrating his 100th episode since he joined. He's not been on 100 episodes. Fuck, man. He's probably only been on like 30. But let me tell you about Tony. Unlike Joe, Tony was very responsible when he joined. We recorded 2 podcast files per person back in the day. We all recorded our local audio, and then I would sync it up and mix it together. And that's how we did the podcast. So Tony would always get his tracks up the night we recorded, which was awesome. And now Tony just don't give no fucks. Everyone else would they would get their tracks up hopefully before the following Monday when we're supposed to go live. But I appreciate Tony's enthusiasm at the beginning. But where did that go, Tony? Where are we now, huh? Kids these days, I'll tell you what. So there you go, Tony. There is your mention of Tony Horvath on An Alex Talks. So episode 50, I talked about it in my other Alex Talks about the history of Irrational Passions. We joined the Retroids Podcast Network, which was so weird because about a year beforehand, like a year leading, I would say a little over a year, I'd come to Retroids and started posting on the forums just like as a fan of the podcast there in April 2010, which was a few months before we started the show. And I'd come to Retroids with nothing. And then within just over a year, I had become part of the Retroids Podcast Network. It was a really, really proud moment for me. And, now I can call this my bros are Retroids friends. And then, it's like irreplaceable relationships. It was a totally amazing thing, and Joe had been working for it for a while, and Scott and Evan were totally pumped about it. So, episode 61, the next big guest we had on was Danny Weister, who you may know from Podcast Beyond because he premieres almost all of his songs there. And he does the intro and outro song for our podcast. It's 2-player co-op. To bring us in, and The World Is Saved to throw us out. Danny's awesome. I've met him in real life. I met him at Beyond 300. He's like the nicest person in the world. So if you don't already follow Danny, he does amazing music. He's at TUA News on Twitter. And it was such a fun show. We just listened to music for a lot of it, and then Danny has awesome taste in video game music, so it was awesome. Greg. I won't forget you, Greg. Greg was initially on episode 68. It was the first podcast he was on. Let me tell you the backstory behind Greg. So, Greg and I hadn't talked for 3 years. This was my freshman year of college, so it was... Yeah, we hadn't talked in years since, like, sophomore year of high school. And Greg and I used to be really good friends in elementary and middle school, but that was back when I was like a total monster of a human being. I was a total asshole, and I just took it all out on Greg because I'm a horrible person. Whatever I say, I'm an awful human being. So back when we were a lot younger, Greg and I would hang out a lot, but I would be a total monster to him. So which explains why Greg didn't talk to me sooner. But when we were freshmen in college, at some point, Greg sent me a message on Facebook. He's like, "Hey, Alex, man, we haven't hung out in a while. What's up?" I'm like, "Oh, hey, Greg." And as soon as Greg messages me, all I remember is just the horrible way I treated him when we were kids. I'm like, "Not much." So we started talking about video games because he knew I was still into the video games. I'm like, "I have a podcast about video games. You want to give it a listen?" And he started listening, and he enjoyed it. A week later, or it might have been like 2 days later, Greg and I hung out. And I'm like, "Hey, we're recording a podcast tonight. Did you want to kind of sit in on it? And, I'd like to hear what you've been playing recently." And that's how we've done it. A friend of the show, Nathan, has been on. A friend of the show, Chris, who was a host at some point. I'm not even going to mention Chris because he was like, "I was never a host." So that's how Greg came on the show. And as soon as I saw Greg, the first day I said, "I'm like, Greg, can I just take a moment and say I'm sorry for being the worst human being ever created when we were kids?" And he's like, "You know what? It's in the past. It's in the past." Now I just give Greg shit on a whole new level, but he gives equal amounts of shit back. If you haven't watched Greg and I stream video games, you are missing out. Tell you what. So that was a ton of fun. So Greg joined on episode 68. He was first on then. He kind of became an auxiliary host after that at some point. There's no like real definition, and now he's just a host, you know. He's one of the crew. Nabishin was first on. He likes me to specify this. Nabishin first came on in our 2011 Extra Life special. So there you go, Nabishin. I won't say his first official episode though was episode 82, Irrational Passions Mass Effect Edition, when we looked back fondly on all of our Mass Effect memories in preparation for Mass Effect 3. That was an awesome show. Nabishin kind of like hosted that show too. It was weird. That was episode 82. That's a great show. If you're a fan of Mass Effect, you should listen to that. But yes, Nabishin was technically his first real appearance was on episode 2, Extra Life 2011. And Nabishin's great. Nabishin's so much fun. Like when we first hung out, it was when we drove to Indus Fest in it was 2010 maybe. We picked him up. Then Evan's van fucking fell apart, and then it was just a train wreck. And that was the first time we ever met Nabishin in person. We had been friends like online, but it was just like the worst first impression. And then the first time we hung out after that was Extra Life, and he didn't talk to any of us. He was just chilling in my room, like not my room. It was like an area in my house. He was hanging out with all of us, and he didn't talk to any of us because he was so shy. Cause that's how Nabishin is. He just doesn't talk to people he meets. But now, you know, I'll get into it in a minute when I tell you when Nabishin officially joined. But yeah, Nabishin's awesome. And Nabishin did join on episode 98. Ain't nobody got time for that. It was his first official show as a full-time host. I believe I introduced him as saying, Nabishin, I guess you're kind of a host now? And he's like, oh, yes. And now Nabishin says, if you're a big enough fan, even you can host Irrational Passions Podcast. So, which isn't true. Don't listen to him. We have enough hosts. We have like 20. And yeah, Nabishin's awesome. He refers to himself, rightfully so, as the ideas man of Irrational Passions Podcast. Because what the fuck do I know? I honestly half of the stuff I come up with would be half as interesting without Nabishin. He's great. He's a great addition. Tony, take note. Nabishin's great. He added the Nabishin Asks segment at the end of the show recently, and that's such a great way to close out the show. I'm glad, and you know, he adds his odd gaming taste flair, which I really enjoy, because Nabishin and I like a lot of the same games, but when we don't like the same game, we get so indignant about it to each other. It's tons of fun, and obviously, if you haven't seen it, Nabishin and I have the Game or Die. We're currently looking for a new game to play. He wants to play God Hand, and I want to play Tales of Vesperia. So, who do you think's gonna win that one? Nabishin? So yeah, Nabishin joined on 98. That led us to episode 100. Episode 100, I wanted to be super special. What I did for episode 100 was partially the result of canceling Irrational Podtacular, because postponing the Irrational Podtacular, I'll say. Inevitably postponing. I wanted to fly Joe up, and I wanted to fly Joe up for Irrational Podtacular, but I could only do one, and I'm like, 100 it's 100 episodes, it's 2 years of Irrational Passions. I want this to be one of the most special episodes we do. To this day, this is going to change this fall for Extra Life, but to this day, episode 100 is the only time all 7 hosts have been in the same room together. And episode 100 is fucking amazing. It is one of the best. It is one of the best, if not the best weekend of my life. I love that episode. I love how it came out. I love how much fun we had. It's an unforgettable weekend of just playing Cards Against Humanity, Spelunky, and going to Otakon after the fact. It was tons of fun. And yeah, it was a celebration. I had some of my personal friends there, and all the podcast people were there, and it was just a personal celebration of just how much fun we had with the show for 2 years, and it was fantastic. Episode 200, God knows what's going to happen then, so keep your ears to the floor. To the ground? I don't know. Let's see. So we started using Google Hangout with episode 107. which was in part because I like the idea of being able to see everybody when we did a podcast, because it's way easier. Plus now I know exactly when Evan's playing 3DS, exactly when Scott's playing League or Dota or whatever Scott plays now, Binding of Isaac, and exactly when Tony's not paying attention at all. So Google Hangout's great. We do Hangout on air, which obviously the uploads go to this YouTube channel. And the thing about Hangouts on air, like, to be fair, to be real with you guys, we don't really like Google Hangout because it'll cut you off while you're typing and all that shit. But when we do on air, it backups the show without me having to record like a local backup. So that's the reason we use it for the most part, is the YouTube backup. I can rip the audio from that and put that out as a show if something happens with one of our audio tracks. So that's the big reason why we use Google Hangout. And that's all I have written down here. I would say, we had a lot more guests on than that. We've had people from Control Alt Kill on. I've been on that show a few times. We had Indus Chris on. Chris from Interactive Distractions. Mr. Indus, if I may. We had Rob, Darkside Rob, GC Darkside Rob on Twitter, on, who is obviously the host of Game Crashers. We've had a lot of people on. Like a lot of other podcast hosts. Ryan, from the Great Geek Debate. Spencer, hopefully from the Great Geek Debate at some point. He had expressed interest. Gotten a couple of emails from people that want to come on the show, and hopefully they will be on the show. I have a couple ideas for other big names to have on the show too. Just, for funsies. It's just been a long ride. The podcast is what, keeps the site going for the most part. Other than that, the website is just kind of like my personal portfolio because no one else writes for it. No offense to anybody else. It's just like, I'm the writer of the team. I didn't ask everyone else who wants to be a game developer coding that Alex the MMO RPG. That's a good episode of the podcast if you haven't heard it. The podcast is its own special thing, and it's so separate from the writing and all of that. It's just the only thing that crosses over really is the hosts, and the hosts. I have to say, I'll take a minute. I'll get all up close and personal. Everybody that's been on the show, all the hosts, all the main hosts, Evan, Scott, Tony, Joe, Nabishin, and Greg, I would consider them some of my best friends in the world. And normally I wouldn't, because fuck those guys. They give me nothing but shit all the time. But I love them all to death. And, I've met Nabishin and Joe through the podcast, and they've become really good friends and people that I like to spend time with and hang out and just sit and talk about video games. Like Nabishin and I hung out for over the course of 15 hours to record a Game or Die on Twitch. Like, I wouldn't do that with someone I didn't like, or someone that I didn't have like a good relationship with. So it's just like those people are really special to me. I know that sounds all sappy and gross, but it's true. If you guys are watching this, I love you guys. I sound like I'm getting choked up, but I'm actually burping. I'm so sorry. I should have just started crying. I do love you guys, though. It's been fucking 141 episodes of insanity, and I would not have it any other way. I wonder, though, we look back at the podcast, and we've had 4 hosts join, and I wonder if, like, what if in the future people leave and other people join? Like, who would those people be? What would they be getting themselves into? I can't imagine. I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility because I'm stupid and I'll let anybody join a podcast apparently. But I can't imagine what new personalities would come and join us. It would be fun to find out. So I love the show. I love the podcast. If you don't listen to the podcast, Irrational Passions Podcast, home of irrationality, as we used to say back when we still had our souls. Go check it out. Please listen. We put tons of time and effort into it, and we have tons of fun with it. So I hope you guys would enjoy it as well. And please check it out. It's tons of fun. And yeah, I guess that pretty much wraps up this rendition of Alex talking at a camera with this awesome one of the new logos. I love it. Thank you, Jesse, again. If you like this, then please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and then tell everyone that you've ever met about Alex Talks and Irrational Passions and how awesome everything is, because that will be awesome. That will help us out tons. Also, if you have ideas, please give me topic ideas. I'm running out. I need more. I've already recorded 2 more of these that'll go up next week, but I need more ideas for topics because I'm running low. Let me know what you want me to talk about. Just put the hashtag AlexTalks at AlFighter27. I will get back to you. I will let you know if it's dumb and I'll never do it, or I will let you know if I'm totally down to do it. So let me know about those. And yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So until next time, I'm going to keep talking, hopefully, unless my voice just goes and not getting choked up, but sounding like I am. And hopefully you guys will keep listening. Peace. My first review of a game called Blacklight Tango Down. Whew. Terrible review. 1. I gave it a 6, though, which I fucking stand by that score.